RealAgriculture.com's coverage of Cropweek 2012 in Saskatoon is brought to you by Nodulator XL, accelerated performance, accelerated yield, and Cantera Seeds, yes you can, and FarmLink Marketing Solutions, market analysis works. The situation as we are about to enter this change in Canada, as you look at it, what's your reaction to it? Or can you provide any sort of comfort or encouragement as far as what Australian farmers went through and how Canadians should feel about it?
Yeah. But probably the best example that I can cite was the season, the 2010-2011 winter crop season. And in that particular year we had a record wheat crop. Now I suspect that record wheat crop is soon to become our second biggest wheat crop. The crop that's currently being harvested I think will surpass last year's record. But it was a record wheat crop, and the big thing about the crop that we took in last year was the amount of weather damaged grain. We had a major weather event on the east coast, and we had substantial, a lot more than we could ever use within Australia, grain that was downgraded or wheat that was downgraded to feed grade. Now normally we would, feed grains that Australia produces, we're normally able to find homes for that, and so, but we've never really exported that grain, whereas last year we had millions of tonnes of this grain that we had to find a home for. Now these are skills that if it had just been left to AWB, they wouldn't have had the networks in place to find homes for that grain overseas, whereas because we had a deregulated market, we had a number of international, and when I say international, not just companies that are domiciled out of Australia, but also Australian international trading houses that did have those networks, particularly through Asia, and hence we were able to find homes for that downgraded feed grain. So we had a record production, we had record amount of wheat that was downgraded, and then on top of that we had a record shipping program. Now all of these things don't happen unless there's strong commercial imperatives for it to happen, and also in the absence of the heavy hand of government coming in over the top, stifling innovation. So that was that's just public information that where the Australian market was, and of course that grain was finding homes overseas on the international market at international market prices as well. Whereas if it had to have stayed in Australia, it wouldn't have been anywhere near the sorts of values that it did achieve.
Whereas as farmers look at this open market in Australia, in the first initial years here, what's the feeling in the farming community?
It depends who you speak to. I would say that overall that the vast majority of growers have recognised and understand the situation and are comfortable with the arrangements. There's no question at all that there are still some people who are just fervent believers in the single desk, and irrespective of what is said or done, they will maintain that view. Yeah. And that will never dissipate. But as a whole, the industry's just moved on, and it's just not an issue anymore.
Are you surprised by the? I'll describe it as hoopla, or we've got a real political, ideological battle going on here. Are you surprised?
Well, in some respects, yes, because that certainly didn't occur in Australia. We had bipartisan political support for the deregulation of the Australian wheat market, and that came. And the reason that it did come about, it wasn't policy by either of the political parties to get rid of the AWB monopoly. It came about through the Food for All program and the disgrace that it brought to the Australian nation as a whole. And no political party was going to stand for that sort of behaviour by a monopoly organisation that brought such discredit to Australia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, have wheat acres been on the decline in Australia?
No, just the opposite. We have, as I was saying previously, we've got record production, and that's based on certainly on increasing yields.
Yeah, prices have been good too.
Yeah, and prices have been good, and there's more acres going over to wheat than there's ever been before, and shifting out of, and you need to. It'd be very simplistic just to say, oh, that's because of the deregulation in the Australian market. there's obviously a lot of other things that come into interplay. You know, the value of other commodities, in particular wool, which was such a big portion of the Australian agricultural economy. That is, in the last 15 years, the amount of wool that Australia produces has halved, and so that country goes over to something, and that something in the main has been cropping, of which wheat is about 2/3 of our production.
What's
2/3 or more?
Is there any sort of reaction from? Is there any sort of reaction from the Australian grain community in terms of Canada lifting its single desk?
Look, with no disrespect to Canada, you know, from an Australian perspective, we've moved on, and the deregulation is just not an issue anymore. It's just not talked about. We're focusing on what do we need to do to maintain our current presence within world markets, and what's occurring in Canada is of interest, but it's of passing interest only. And I suppose in some respects it's just a case of, oh well, that's the end of the last single desk. But that's much discussion as it does get.